Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Thursday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Getting ready for the big weekend, which we'll be talking about a little bit.
But don't leave
the
home.
Next day. So my big problem is it's a holiday weekend coming up.
Yeah.
But I don't know what day is 4th of July. It looks like, I wonder if they've canceled the 4th of July. That's what I'm afraid of. I think spiritually it's been canceled. But anyway, we will talk about that later on as we get closer to the 3rd of July or the 4th of July or whatever. But today we want to talk about herd immunity. Herd immunity is something that we've been supporting, and nature supports it, and yet the officials who want to keep us in panic are in denial. Oh no, you can't trust them. No, that's dangerous. You have to have a vaccine. If there's such a thing as herd immunity, what will Bill Gates do for his entertainment? You know, who's going to develop the vaccines? So, but today we found some articles. I think Reason had this article that. Herd immunity is essentially here. It's coming. Like yesterday when you put up the chart to show where the death levels were from the coronavirus, which is down to 0, I said, well, maybe the epidemic is over. And evidently there was enough positive thinking that they said, well, let's open up a little bit. We're the boss, and we can tell people what they can do with their lives, and maybe we can just loosen up a little bit and have these governors and mayors and everybody else toned down their regulations. So it seemed to be moving pretty good, and people were excited about it. But we're in the midst of the very opening of this. But guess what? They found out too early. But we don't. The people aren't scared enough, and the people who need it and want to intimidate people. If herd immunity is around the corner, and which I believe it is, I think it's way down. And of course, they fudge the figures. Say, well, what are you guys talking about? There are more cases than ever before. Yeah. But we've gone over that before. That's a little bit of fudging the figures. That's a little bit about fake reporting. But there are some articles now that show and confirm it that maybe just within months or two it will be a non-issue. But I think there are some. What will they do if this is not an issue? They don't even have that new virus to complain about yet. I think that's always in store. But right now, you know, the herd immunity was moving in the right direction, but some people now are saying too much, too fast, and we have to scare the people. And unfortunately, they are. It looks like just in our neighborhood, more people now wear masks than ever before. And yet we went through the lockdown, and some people did, but not as much as now. So it's an event that has continued to plague the people. And if you're counting masks, you would have to say we're not at herd immunity, or at least the people aren't confident enough yet. So we'd like to, with these bits and pieces of good news, give the people a little bit of confidence, and they shouldn't live in fear and panic because, the world has lived with various viruses and bacterial infections a lot worse than coronavirus. And we in this country have survived, and a lot of people have been very sick and died. And quite frankly, I don't think this rates as one of the most serious types of panics or infections that we've ever had to deal with. Matter of fact, I think it's medium or low medium from the amount of danger from this infection.
Well, the masks show herd mentality, not herd immunity. And you do see more and more of them. But the reason for our good news is Reason. There's a good article in Reason magazine talked about a couple of studies in Europe. They're studying this now. We've had several months with this virus. Scientists are able to learn more about it. At first, remember, we don't know anything about it. We've got to panic. Now they know a lot more about it. A couple of interesting studies that are indicating that we, if not at herd immunity, very close to it. And Ron Bailey wrote this at Reason. It came out yesterday. The main takeaways from the article: many more people have developed T-cell immunity than previously thought from this. In New York, it may be 40%, which is close to the threshold for herd immunity. And the other is interesting. It's a German study that having a previous common cold, coronavirus, and gotten over it actually may help boost. And this is interesting. What the Germans did is they exposed blood from a COVID-19 infected to blood without COVID-19 infection. They found that 81% of the subjects who never had COVID-19 were producing, nevertheless, the T-cell immune reaction to it. So the conclusion is that earlier common cold infection may provide 8 in 10 people with some form of immunity. All pretty good news. And what is herd immunity? And I think Ron did a great job in putting it up. Herd immunity is the resistance to the spread of a contagious disease that results if a sufficiently high proportion of the population is immune to the illness. Some people are still susceptible, but they are surrounded by immune individuals who serve as a barrier, preventing the microbes from reaching them. Epidemiologists typically estimate that the COVID-19 threshold for herd immunity is around 60 to 70%. So you want to have people that have had it and gotten over it, protecting the people who haven't had it or who are more susceptible.
Right, and I think this is important because I was born in '35, and there weren't that many vaccines. There were a couple that were available, but there was this idea and understanding about herd immunity, and that if people got a disease or exposed to it, eventually these diseases came and went, and that is when people, literally exposed their kids.
Yeah.
And I had 4 brothers, and I can remember a couple winters that I don't know how my mother stood the whole thing, but most of us had went through them, one kid the next day, and nobody was really excited, or worried, and they didn't call in the federal government or anything, and nobody had to petition, and there were no lockdowns and that kind of stuff. So this herd immunity has been around for a long time, and I think that it really annoys me when we have the expert scientists who are the great immunologists of all time get up and they don't have the vaguest notion that they may know about it, and maybe that's a threat to them because that curtails their plans, because this is planned chaos, and that will affect that. So they're in business of not just getting rid of diseases and getting rid of diseases. There are some other ulterior motives for all the mess that we're putting up with.
Yeah, that's true. And people might say, oh, Reason Magazine, those crazy libertarians, they don't want to believe them. Well, here's Scott Gottleib. He's now in the mainstream media. He's the former head of the CDC. He went on to Big Pharma, but he's been a pretty big scaremonger now for a while. Now that Fauci's star kind of went down a little bit, he came out into the limelight. Here he is on CNBC yesterday. He said the outbreak won't be fully over till January. It's supposed to be a bad news story, but it's actually not. And here's why. He says by then we'll either have a vaccine or so many people will have been infected that it will naturally mitigate the spread of the disease. He's saying the same thing, herd immunity is going to be here. He says by January, what have you. Well, here's Fauci behind, in front of a congressional committee, I think it was yesterday, certainly this week. Someone asked him, one of the congressmen asked him about vaccine. What's the fastest you've ever seen a vaccine developed and completely developed? He said that was 1.5 years it took. And that was with Zika. And he said, but the thing is, by the time we got that Zika vaccine, Zika had died out, so we didn't even need it anyway.
Oh, my goodness. I bet they were disappointed. Can you imagine how disappointed they'll be if we don't have a crisis ongoing? Exactly. And then they'll have that vaccine by January or February or March, and it'll be unnecessary or it won't work or people will die from it. That's a lot of the history that they don't want to talk about. We talk a lot about how does this happen? Why do we have this chaos? Is it the fact that science is weak and they don't understand it, and people panic easily, and yet we have pointed out some of it is deliberate. I mean, some people benefit from it, the epidemiologists and the people who make the drugs and all this. So there's a lot of that there is a plan for it. And some people even called it the planned chaos of the people who benefit from this. And that's what's going on now. They don't want you to know the truth. And the planners for this chaos are anxious for everybody to know about what's going on and scare the people. But, that term came up, but it refreshed my memory about one of Mises's book. and he had a book called Planned Chaos. And his point in that book was the chaos always occurs with socialism, and which is true. I mean, all we have to do is look at Zimbabwe and different places, and the places even in this country that get pretty socialized, you know, and it's a result of the planning. But this time it's interesting. I think we are so close to the conditions that socialism creates. In a way, this pandemic that they've created has literally destroyed or contributed to the destruction of the marketplace, because the Fed had already gotten that destruction going. So here they come along, and we have chaos. I think there is a group that have in their mind planned the chaos, and they use it for a justification for bringing in Marxism.
Yeah.
You know, oh, there's an inequity and wealth and all these problems, so we have to have chaos, and then we'll use that as an excuse. But we already have the chaos, which I argue is a point that even though we don't call ourselves socialists, and sometimes I tell people, you don't use it because I don't think we quite have it. We have interventionism to an extreme. We have corporatism, inflationism, and all these things. But when the market collapses, sort of like when they put wage and price controls on in 1971, that to me was a point where we toppled over into a socialistic economy because there was no pricing. In this case, it's a mixture. Because we have over excessive interventionism, but the economy is acting more like we have socialism. And if you look at how medical care is distributed, and I saw some figures today how much money is being spent on medical care is extreme. And yet, what do we get for it? We get the Gottleibs of the world and the Faucis of the world to come and intimidate who work with the drug companies. And that creates the chaos. And literally, if the chaos isn't real, we have to scare them to death. Oh yeah, it's coming. It's next month. And you know, we've gone over all these headlines. The headlines are there to intimidate people. And that is the reason they can keep this going. Right now, they're scared to death that herd immunity is coming.
Yeah.
And it's just around the corner. And our charts, they're frightened because of what we've been reporting. You know, look at what they show. The people aren't dying from this anymore. The immunity is growing. And they turn around and says, yes, look, that's a sign of how bad it is, how much it has spread. No, all they're doing is testing the spreading that has already occurred where people were actually immune, and that should be good news.
Yeah, and not only are they frightened of reaching that herd immunity, amazingly enough, they're doing everything they can to prevent that. If we accept, as even Gottlieb says and the others say, that healthy people get it and get over it, and that helps develop immunity and protecting the people who are vulnerable to getting sick, if that's a good thing, which is pretty much accepted it is, even by Gottlieb and Fauci, then why are they trying to prevent it? Why are we reclosing down Texas because there are more cases? More cases and less deaths would be a good news story because people are getting it and getting over it. But that's not what's happening. In fact, Dr. Paul, what's happening in Texas is even more insidious than that. And there have been some information coming out recently about why there's a spike in Texas. The big spike in Texas, you see it in all of the hysterical news. Got to shut it down. Even Abbott, he's not able to stand up to the naysayers. What happened in Texas is interesting. In the middle of May, the Texas Department of Health Services changed the definition of what a COVID case is. And we know this now because the county judge of Collin County in Texas, there was a judge commissioner's meeting where he talked about the changes that came down from on high on how they're changing the definition and the criteria. And he said in mid-May, we're just opening up. I'm worried this is going to cause another spike. Talk about prophetic. And here's what the changes are, Dr. Paul. Before in Texas, the test must be positive. You had to have a COVID test that came up positive. Late in May, that was no longer needed. Now they're counting probable cases as COVID cases late in May. And what were the criteria to determine a probable, i.e. a COVID case? Any two of the following symptoms, and they don't need to be measured. Chills, rigors, myalgia, headache, sore throat, new smell or taste disorders, or any one of these group, cough, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing. So if you present to a doctor with that, and have that, you're COVID.
Yeah. This is just a follow-up of what happened very early on because they were emphasizing deaths. And they could do that because, they contributed a bit to the deaths in the nursing homes. But they then told people that you didn't even have to have a test, and you on the death certificate you could say COVID virus. Yeah. And now they don't emphasize deaths anymore. They emphasize just the diagnosis. So what you're talking about, making it easier to define it, and no testing.
Yeah, no testing.
It's absolutely insane, and that's why it's such a shame that we see so many people just rolling over, getting intimidated, scared to death, and unnecessarily. Because of course, the other side of this, people do die from this. People die from these problems, but I actually have a personal belief, and there's some evidence that more people have died from the lockdowns and all this nonsense because, once again, we mentioned it yesterday, that our governor said it was if your surgery is not emergency, don't go to the hospital. And that was a total failure in the first go-around. It increased the problems. It disrupted the hospitals. I mean, it was a real mess. But so they're back to it. They don't learn the lesson. So it really boils down to, once again, that I've touched on, and we have touched on it before, and that is you explained how they did it, what the mechanism was for changing it. The big question is why are they doing this?
Yeah.
Is it pure stupidity? Because I don't believe that everybody that opposes what we say, are totally stupid. I think they're very sincere, but they've been influenced, and they've listened to the experts that are paid hacks for a certain philosophy and a certain group of people who have money. Why should they believe in people that are in business with the pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah.
Where's Gottlieb these days?
Yeah, he's making some money. We have a clip of the judge, of Collin County judge. It's just a few seconds long, but he's expressing his concern to his colleagues. Let's listen in for a second.
Best efforts, it will be very hard to get in front of this story. For those that don't know about this case definition, who don't understand it, when they see these dramatic increases in numbers, they're going to be inclined to think either that we've hit some different spike, and now, quite frankly, we have this new pandemic raging through the community, which is a false narrative. That's not at all what that is sharing with us and communicating to us. Or they're going to be inclined to think, well, we weren't doing an honest job with the numbers prior.
And what he's saying is by changing this definition, Dr. Paul, you're going to get a lot of false positives. You're going to get wrong information. And here's a quote from Hill in the papers there. He said, quote, "It's remarkable how low the standard is now." This is mid-May. He's warning you're going to get a spike because you're changing it. "I fear this is coming at a time just when we're starting to reopen. If the numbers jump in a false way, it's going to be very concerning to our citizens that we're actually going backwards. The numbers have jumped in a false way, and we're going backwards."
Yeah, wake up.
Yeah.
So, there was another story that caught my attention, and it's a plus-minus type of thing. But it has to do with students in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And they devised this contest of exposing themselves deliberately to people who had the virus, and then finding out who would catch it first. And you say, that's the craziest thing you ever heard. It probably is a little nutty because because there is some potential danger. But what it reflects is what the kids, the young people, think about being intimidated and scared to death. And they're saying, we want to go to the beach. This is sort of a beach party type of thing. And they don't want to do this, which means, do you think they would do that if they were trying to protect themselves from polio or tuberculosis? Oh, let's go and just be exposed to somebody with tuberculosis and see if we get it.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that. So in their judgment, that's what they're doing. I think the judgment isn't all that good, but I think it's a reflection of what they're thinking, and they don't believe that it's quite as dangerous. And I think that's why they were so anxious. There's so many stories about how people have lost their jobs and people lost their businesses, and this is not 10 or 15. These are thousands
Millions,
of people,
yeah.
And it's all unnecessary. So it's a difficult thing to weigh risk. And that's why the government should never be in this business of weighing risk. The individuals should make the decisions. And if these, I think that's what the point these students are doing. They're trying to point out that you're not measuring it right. We're not that scared. Don't intimidate us. You say, oh no, you guys are just a bunch of crazy people.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. I think they have evaluated it, and in their estimation, if they thought that there was a 5% chance of doing this, that they would die the next week, they're not going to do it. They've heard all the statistics, of the danger to young people and what it is on the total number of people who get positive, how many people there die, how many people were in nursing homes were added into this. So in a way, suspicion that the government's not telling us the truth, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's licensed to do dumb things either. But I think this is fascinating, and that this may be a signal that talks more about herd immunity than all our fancy tests.
Yeah, that's true, people's behavior. Well, I'm going to do a couple of things, Dr. Paul, and hopefully I'll entertain you a little bit. But I have a few clips, and just the juxtaposition of these two clips I think is interesting. Let's do the next one. This is WHO, those great experts who have been so honest and so accurate. WHO warns some countries may have to reinstate lockdowns as coronavirus pandemic accelerates. The pandemic is accelerating. We've got to go back to lockdown. Let's do the next clip. Here's accelerating pandemic in the U.S. U.S. deaths involving COVID-19. Can't even hardly count them on June 27th. So this is the justification for the shutdown. So let's go to the next one. Here's another one. Here's just the things that you notice. Here's Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania, your birth state, Dr. Paul. This guy's a total tyrant. He just expanded the mask-wearing order. You've got to expand it. Pennsylvania is in dire straits. It's coming back. Let's do the next one. Here's Pennsylvania. Look at the death count. It's going down to almost zero. It's a lie. And do one more, actually. And this is hilarious, Dr. Paul. Black Lives Matter protests may have slowed the spread of coronavirus. Not only did it not infect more people, it helped solve the problem. Yeah, right. And look at this, the next one and the final one in this segment. Here's Galveston. No beaches for the 4th of July because you might get coronavirus sitting on that seawall.
When we look at these charts, which are so dramatic, you couldn't even measure the number of people dying now from it. And the chart is so clear. A chart is a great picture. And I often wonder, of those people that I talked about, the ones I consider, I give them a break, you're an honest person, you want to do the right thing. Wonder what they think when they look at this. Are they just blind to it, or do they decide that they don't understand it, or have they never looked at it? But obviously, it'd be interesting to get one of those individuals who's honest with himself and honest with all of us, wanting to look at the right thing, and just, in a very quiet, deliberate session, ask them, what do you think? How do you interpret this chart? What do you think this chart means? And why would the government say that it's up here when it's down here? He'd have to say, well, I don't believe the charts. Well, then look at another chart. You might have another one that tells the same story. But maybe the fear that is driving the kids to the beaches might be the best test.
Yeah, that's true. People behaving. Well, I'm going to do Villain of the Week. Dr. Paul, this is becoming the most difficult segment because there are so many. We could do probably a week's worth of shows on it. But Maya from Maine sent me an email, and she sent me a couple emails, and she's starting to convince me that Governor Janet Mills of Maine, not a super, central state, but she's got to be the villain of the week. Yesterday, she announced she's going to toughen the mask requirements. Don't you dare go outside with a mask, mandating that businesses wear masks. She's killed tourism in a state where tourism is a real driver of the economy. It's all gone. So you ask, well, what's going on in Maine? It sounds pretty bad. New deaths, new crisis, death spike. Are they running out of beds? Are they running out of ventilators? Well, let's look at the statistics from Maine. Take this next clip and we'll have a look at what's going on in Maine, the crisis in Maine. If we can have a look at that next clip.
There we go.
Here it is. New deaths, 0.
Uh-oh.
0.
Bad
Hospitalizations, 29. Total ICU beds, 398. Available, 132. Total ventilators, 317. Available ventilators, 250. This is the crisis that's caused Janet Mills to go back to putting on your mask or go to jail. And here's the next one. Here's rules for thee, but not for me. Here's old Janet going out, having an ice cream. She's not social distancing. She doesn't have a mask on. She's visiting with her fans. Even worse, and this is what really finally convinced me, is the next clip, Dr. Paul. They're putting up signs in Maine telling people how you have to dress to prevent corona. You can wear a tank top, but don't let the sides show. I mean, if you look at this, it is so absurd. It's almost like the Taliban have taken over in Maine. So with that, Governor Janet Mills, you are the villain of the week. You take your place in the pantheon of really, really bad leaders.
Well, for those of us who are suspicious of what's going on here, those who promote this have an agenda. And I happen to believe it has a lot to do with people giving up their individual judgment and individual rights and yielding to the control of government at all levels and being intimidated. And and they contribute to this by just going along with it. So that is, I think, the big issue is, why do they do it? They do it because of the pressure, and those who want the control, they get the control. So I think that until the people wake up and say, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, we're not going to do it. But it's we're not quite there yet. But I hope my belief is that truth wins out in the end. But I want the end to come real soon. I want them to wake up sooner, because the danger is just not there. And the real danger is the overreaction by government, the authoritarianism of government. But that all starts not just with the invasion of the authoritarians into the coronavirus deal. It's the invasion of government into everything that we do. And a total ignoring of the Constitution, where government should never do anything it isn't given direct and explicit authority to do it. Now, as long as there's no explicit prohibition, they go ahead and do it. And right now, what I've been amazed about is what's going on here is not, and I think maybe this is a reflection of the president, there's been less of these mandates. I'm going to do this and close everything down. It's been the local people. So, local government we argue for. But if the local government officials still endorse the principles of authoritarianism and control of people, it doesn't do any good. So it has to be a moral principle that we own our own lives and we should run it. We should take our own risks and take care of ourselves rather than depending on government. Because if there are problems and the bad people get in government, it affects every single one of us. Yes, when people have their freedoms, they can make mistakes and they really hurt themselves and their close ones. But just think, if you complain about the people who don't know how to run their own lives and you put them in government to run everybody's life, you should think things that doesn't make any sense. And right now, too many people have capitulated, and hopefully as soon as possible they'll wake up and look at some of these perfectly explainable charts that Daniel puts out to show the fear shouldn't be there. It's dissipating, it's going away, and it's nothing brand new. And without going to the point of denying that there isn't some danger, it's how you handle risk and danger that is the issue, not whether it exists or not. And right now, we can be very thankful that the danger of this epidemic, this infection, never got as bad as they thought. We should be thankful for that. And we should be thankful that it's essentially over. But we can't be thankful for allowing the authoritarians, the bureaucrats, and the politicians and the drug companies getting away with this and using this as an excuse to further undermine our liberties. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Please come back soon.